The morning my daughter-in-law served me a plate of 3-day-old pasta while everyone else at the table cut into fresh ribeye, I didn't say a word. I just looked down at that cold clump spaghetti and thought about the woman I used to be, the one who once ran a household, raised 2 sons, buried a husband, and still kept the lights on. I sat there and I ate it. Every last bite. And I told myself it would not happen again. My name is June. I'm 67 years old, and I lived in a house I've owned for 31 years in Savannah, Georgia. A pale yellow house with a wraparound porch that my late husband Harold and I bought when our boys were still in elementary school. Harold passed 11 years ago from a heart attack that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. No warning. One moment he was watching the Weather Channel, and the next he was gone. After that, it was just me and the house and whatever forward motion I could manufacture on my own. I'd retired 2 years before Harold died. 30 years as a licensed practical nurse will wear down your body in ways that don't show on the outside. And by the time I was 60, my knees had made a decision for me. My pension wasn't lavish, but between that and Harold's Social Security survivor benefits I managed. I kept the property taxes paid. I kept the roof maintained. I kept the yard the way Harold liked it. Azaleas along the front fence. Gardenias by the porch steps. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable. And in your 60s, stable feels like a kind of grace. My older son, Thomas, lives in Charlotte with his wife and their 2 daughters. We talk on the phone most Sundays. He's steady, always has been, even as a boy. My younger son, Marcus, is the one this story is really about. Marcus was never a bad person. I want to be clear about that, because the easiest version of this story would make him a villain, and that's not quite right. He was charming and funny and too handsome for his own good, and somewhere along the way he'd learned that those qualities could substitute for discipline. He'd drift between jobs, sales, logistics, a brief and disastrous attempt at a food truck business, and I'd watch from a distance, hoping the next thing would be the thing that stuck. When he was 34, he married a woman named Cassandra. She was from Atlanta, sharp-dressed, quick with a smile that didn't always reach her eyes. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. At the rehearsal dinner, I told her she was beautiful, and I meant it. She thanked me and then turned back to her own family without another word. I noted it and let it go. The first year of their marriage, they lived in a rental apartment in Savannah. Marcus was working in insurance sales, doing well enough to seem self-sufficient. Then the lease came up, and they said the landlord was raising the rent by $400 a month. They asked if they could stay with me temporarily. Just 3 or 4 months, they said, while they saved up for something better. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. They moved in on a Saturday in March with a moving truck and enough furniture to fill a storage unit, which is exactly where most of it ended up. Within a week, the house had rearranged itself around them. Cassandra chose which shelf in the refrigerator she wanted. Marcus took over the garage for his workout equipment. Their shoes filled the entryway. Small things, all of them, and I told myself, small things don't matter when your son is under your roof and you can hear him laugh at the dinner table again. 3 months became 6. 6 became 12. I stopped counting after the first year. They paid me no rent. I hadn't asked for any, partly because 3 months had felt too short to formalize, and by the time I wanted to bring it up, it had been long enough that asking felt awkward and almost accusatory. I know how that sounds. I'm not naive. But there's a particular kind of paralysis that comes from loving someone and not wanting to fracture something that still feels on the surface like family. Cassandra did not work during this time. She was between positions, as she put it, pursuing a certification in interior design. I never saw any coursework. What I did see was online shopping deliveries arriving 3-4 times a week, clothing boxes, a weighted blanket that cost more than my monthly electric bill, a set of linen curtains for the bedroom they were sleeping in, my guest room that she ordered without asking. Marcus, to his credit, was working. He'd left the insurance job and moved into freight brokering, which apparently paid reasonably well when he applied himself, but his salary seemed to evaporate. They ate out most nights. They had streaming subscriptions I wasn't aware of until I saw them on my shared Amazon account. The electric bill climbed $40 a month from what it had been before they arrived. I covered all of it. I didn't say anything. I kept thinking the situation was temporary. The pasta dinner happened 18 months in. It was a Sunday in October, I remember, because the windows were open and the air had that particular early fall quality that Savannah gets, where it's still warm, but something in the light has shifted. I'd spent the afternoon doing yard work, pulling up the summer annuals to make room for pansies. I came inside, washed up, and sat down at my own kitchen table. Cassandra had cooked. This was unusual enough that I noticed it. She'd made ribeye steaks, 3 of them, one for her, one for Marcus, one apparently for herself as a second helping, though I didn't know that yet. When she brought my plate to the table, it held a mound of leftover spaghetti from 3 nights ago that I recognized because I was the one who'd made it. Cold, not reheated, set in front of me while she and Marcus each had a steak that I could smell from across the table, a scent warm and rich and not intended for me. Marcus looked at my plate. He looked at his plate. He said nothing. I ate my pasta. I said it was fine. And underneath the politeness that I'd been practicing my whole life, something changed. Some decision, quiet as a key turning in a lock. The next morning, I made coffee and sat on the porch while the neighborhood was still sleeping. I held my mug and I let myself think clearly. Maybe for the first time in a year and a half, I thought about what I had and what I was allowing to happen to it. The house was mine, paid off entirely in 2019. My savings account held a little over $70,000, money I'd set aside decade by decade for medical emergencies and old age. My pension came in reliably. I had enough. What I did not have was a plan, and it occurred to me, sitting there in the October morning with gardenias still blooming along the porch, that the absence of a plan was itself a kind of answer I'd been giving without meaning to. I called Thomas that afternoon. Not to complain. Thomas is practical and would have turned a conversation into logistics before I'd finished the first sentence. I called him because I needed to say the thing out loud to someone who knew all the history. They served me leftovers while they had steak, I told him, at my own table. There was a long pause. Then Thomas said, "Mom, how long has this been going on?" I thought about the curtains in the guest room, the Amazon account, the electric bill, the 18 months of not asking. Long enough, I said. Thomas told me to call our family attorney, a man named Howard who'd handled Harold's estate and who I'd kept on retainer at Thomas's insistence over the years. I thanked Thomas and told him I'd think about it, which was my way of ending a conversation I wasn't ready to continue. But I did think about it. For 3 days, I thought about almost nothing else. I want to explain something about being a woman of a certain age, because I think younger people sometimes misread the silence of older women as passivity. It isn't. It's calculation. When you've lived 6+ decades, you understand that reaction rarely serves you as well as response. You learn to wait until you know what you're actually doing, because you've seen too many people swing wildly and damage everything around them in the process. The quiet I'd kept for 18 months wasn't weakness. It was me not yet knowing what I wanted the outcome to be. By Thursday, I knew. I called Howard's office Friday morning and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I told no one in the house. I set my alarm for 6, dressed before Cassandra and Marcus were awake, and drove to his office on Bull Street with a manila folder that held my account statements, the deed to the house, a summary of expenses I'd been tracking in a small notebook I kept in my nightstand, and a notepad for questions. I felt more like myself in that car than I had in 2 years. Howard was the kind of man who listened before he spoke, which is rarer than it should be. I sat across from his desk and laid it out without editorializing, the length of their stay, the financial arrangement, or lack of one, the pattern of spending, the spaghetti. He didn't wince or sigh or look at me with that particular pity I'd been afraid of. He asked about my other son. He asked about my health. He asked whether I wanted them to leave or whether I wanted something else entirely. I told him I wanted to be protected. I wanted to make sure that whatever I'd built, this house, this savings, This life went where I intended it to go, and not somewhere it would drift by default. We talked for an hour and a half. By the end of that conversation, I had a revised will, a decision about my accounts, and a letter, drafted in language that was firm but not cruel, that outlined the terms under which Marcus and Cassandra could remain in the house going forward. 3 months' notice to find new housing, a formal rental agreement if they chose to stay beyond that, a list of shared household expenses they would be expected to contribute to beginning immediately. Howard printed everything while I waited. I drove home the long way along the river, watching the water. When I walked in, Cassandra was at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone, and Marcus was eating cereal at the counter. The morning felt ordinary. I set my keys on the hook by the door, poured myself a glass of water, and asked if we could sit down together that evening after dinner. They exchanged a look. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "Everything's fine," I said. "I just need to talk about a few things." That evening, I sat across from both of them at the same table where I'd eaten my cold spaghetti. I had the letter in my hand, but I didn't lead with it. I started by saying that I loved my son and that I had been glad, genuinely glad, to have a home where he could land when he needed to. I meant it. Then I said that the arrangement had gone on longer than any of us had originally intended and that it needed to change. Cassandra put her hand flat on the table. "Are you asking us to leave?" "I'm giving you options," I said. "That letter explains them." I slid it across the table. Marcus read it slowly. I watched his face move through something, discomfort, I think, and behind that, recognition. Cassandra read it after him, and her expression was more fixed, harder to read. "You went to a lawyer," she said. "It wasn't a question." I did. Without saying anything to us. "You didn't say anything to me before you put up curtains in my guest room," I said. I said it quietly. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was just stating a fact. But something in that room shifted. Marcus set the letter down. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen in a very long time. He looked like he was ashamed. Not defensive, not annoyed. Ashamed. "There is a difference." "Mum," he said, "I'm sorry." Cassandra did not say she was sorry. She stood up, took her phone, and went upstairs. We listened to the footsteps cross the ceiling above us. Marcus and I sat there at the table for another hour. He talked in a way I hadn't heard him talk in years, without performance, without the easy charm he usually deployed when he was trying to move a conversation toward what he wanted. He talked about the freight job, about money going out faster than it came in, about a dynamic in his marriage that he hadn't known how to name until recently. He talked about the pasta dinner without me bringing it up first. "I knew that was wrong when it happened," he said. "I didn't say anything. That was wrong too." I told him yes, it was. I told him that loving someone and failing them are not mutually exclusive. That I had done both over the years in different directions. I told him the letter wasn't a punishment, it was a boundary, and there was a difference between those things too. He asked what I needed from him. I told him I needed him to become a person who knew how to ask his mother that question and then actually listen to the answer. Over the next several weeks, things moved. Marcus and Cassandra had conversations I wasn't party to. I could hear the low, tense register of them through walls and floors. In mid-November, Cassandra told me she'd found a position at a design firm in Atlanta that she was starting in January. She said it in passing in the kitchen without making eye contact. I said congratulations and meant it. They found an apartment in Atlanta in December. They signed the lease on a Thursday. Marcus told me over the phone, his voice careful and slightly formal, the way it gets when he's trying to do the right thing and isn't sure how. I told him I was glad and that I wanted to have dinner with them before they left. Just the three of us, at my table, with a proper meal. He said he'd like that. On a Sunday in late December, I cooked. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, cornbread, sweet tea. The table was set with Harold's good plates, the ones I usually kept in the cabinet for Thanksgiving. We ate together, and the conversation was careful at first, and then slowly, gradually, it wasn't. Cassandra told a story about a disastrous client meeting that made me laugh genuinely. Marcus refilled my glass without being asked. Something was different, not fixed, not the way a broken bone is fixed, but different. Acknowledging. After dinner, Marcus helped me clear the table. We stood at the sink side by side the way we used to when he was young, and I handed him plates and he rinsed them. And neither of us said anything important. We just stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, in the house I'd kept standing for 31 years, with the gardenias waiting outside for spring. He moved to Atlanta 2 weeks into January. I went back to my porch in the mornings with my coffee. The house settled back into its own sounds. The creak of the third step, the hum of the refrigerator, the mockingbird that has lived in the magnolia in my backyard for at least 4 years running. I had the guest room repainted, cream with soft white trim, the way I'd always wanted it. I hung a watercolor of the Georgia coast that I'd been keeping in a closet, waiting for a wall that felt right. I opened the kitchen window one morning and let the winter air move through, cold, clean, carrying the smell of gardenias that hadn't bloomed yet but would. I thought about what Howard had said when I left his office that Tuesday, a thought that had stayed with me for months, that protecting yourself is not the opposite of love, that some of the most loving things we do are the things that require us to stop making ourselves smaller. That dignity isn't something you wait to be given. It's something you go out and arrange for yourself, early in the morning before anyone else in the house is awake. I poured a second cup of coffee. I sat on the porch. I watched the neighborhood come alive in the way it always does, slow and ordinary and absolutely itself. I had reclaimed my table, my house, my name inside my own walls. I am 67 years old, and I did not fight for those things. I simply stopped allowing them to be taken. It turns out, after all this time, that is more than enough. There's a particular moment I keep coming back to, not the pasta dinner, not the lawyer's office, not even the morning I drove along the river on the way home. It's the moment at the sink, weeks later, when Marcus stood beside me rinsing dishes in silence. No apology being rehearsed, no explanation being managed, just the two of us. Water running the way it used to be when he was 12 years old, and it was simply his turn to help. That moment cost me 18 months to arrive at, and I've thought a lot about whether the price was worth it. What I know now is that what happened in my house wasn't really about pasta or ribeye or even money. It was about what I had gradually permitted, not out of weakness, but out of a particular kind of love that hadn't yet learned its own limits. I kept giving because giving felt like the right thing, and for a long time I confused right with comfortable for everyone except me. The cause was clear enough looking back. When you absorb every consequence for another person, you remove the very mechanism by which they learn to become responsible. Marcus never had to reckon with what his choices cost, because I was always standing just behind the bill, just under the shortfall, just between him and the thing he needed to face. I thought I was protecting him. I was in some ways preventing him. The effect of that, played out over a year and a half, was a household where my son's wife could serve me leftovers at my own table, and my son could look at his plate and say nothing. That is not a small thing. That is the end result of a long series of small surrenders. What pulled me out wasn't anger. I want to be honest about that. Anger would have been easier and faster, and probably would have burned the relationship down entirely. What pulled me out was something quieter, the decision to think clearly, to sit on my own porch with my own coffee and ask myself what I actually wanted the outcome to be. That kind of thinking takes steadiness. It takes the willingness to look at a situation without flinching, to understand what you contributed to it, and to act from that understanding rather than from the heat of feeling wronged. I am not a perfect woman. I made choices that enabled what happened. Knowing that isn't self-punishment, it's precision. It's what allowed me to walk into Howard's office with a folder of facts instead of a folder of grievances, and to walk out with a plan instead of a wound. And Marcus. He did the harder thing in the end. He looked at what he had become inside my house, and he chose not to defend it. That took something real from him. Whatever that costs a grown man, to sit across from his mother and say, I knew that was wrong and I said nothing. I know it cost him something. I respected him for paying it. The guest room is cream-colored now. The watercolor is on the wall. Every morning I open the kitchen window and the mockingbird is in the magnolia, and everything in my house is exactly where I put it. I earned that, not by fighting, but by deciding finally that I was worth deciding for.